And generally speaking, it does in a lot of ways. The budget request for this year contains quite large increases for democracy and governance across the broader Middle East and North Africa region. When we had this event a year ago, and in conjunction with the report I wrote at that time, and we talked about the large increases in President Bush's final budget request and the large increases for democracy and governance funding over the course of the Bush administration. President Obama has taken those increases and dramatically even increased them further, for the most part, across the region. The funding for democracy and governance across the broader Middle East and North Africa is now $1.54 billion, which is just over double the amount requested by President Bush in his request a year ago. Now, it should be noted on all of these kind of comparisons that, as I said earlier, there was some additional funding later for democracy and governance that came with the supplemental bill. So it's hard to draw a kind of perfect apples comparison. But regardless, the request for democracy and governance programming across the region is dramatically increased. It now represents 14% of the total foreign assistance for the region, which is the highest that figure has ever been. Prior to last year, that figure had never exceeded 5.7% in an annual request. Last year, we were very supportive of the Bush administration's budget, which allocated 10%, which was a significant increase for democracy and governance funding. This year, it's from 10 all the way up to 14, which is an important increase. The most dramatic increases in the region in terms of countries are to Afghanistan and Pakistan. The Obama administration came in and immediately made Afghanistan and Pakistan top priorities and increased funding actually by working with Congress in March, when the Congress was passing the omnibus bill for fiscal year 2009, and they dramatically increased Afghanistan and Pakistan foreign assistance for those two countries, including democracy and governance funding, considerably at that time. In this annual budget, those numbers are solidified, and the funding is drastically increased. I'd like to now kind of go through and talk in a little bit of detail about some of the programs, and then go through with a quick overview of each of some of the countries and how it has changed in the budget and what it says about the administration's priorities. I'd like to begin to talk about MEPI a little bit, the Middle East Partnership Initiative. MEPI was considered to be in serious question about a year ago. We had this discussion a year ago. MEPI, along with MCC, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, were two programs that were considered to be signature initiatives of the Bush administration. They had not been very strongly supported by the Congress, and there was a lot of skepticism as to whether these programs would continue under the next administration, particularly if it were to be a Democratic administration, as it turned out to be. If you look, I don't know if everyone had a chance to pick up the report on the way in. If you look at the chart on page 11 of the report, I'm just going to refer to a couple of these graphs to make some of the points a little bit clearer. You'll see that MEPI, generally speaking, has had its funding decrease. So the two bars in the chart here, the top darker line graph represents the amount requested for MEPI every year, and the one below it in the lighter gray there is the amount that Congress has granted. There's one sort of exceptional point, which in 2006, where you see that it jumps way above the request. That's a little bit misleading in that Congress actually granted quite a bit less than that for the year initially, but then gave the administration the discretion to use some of, to allow MEPI to use some of the funds that were allocated for Iran and Palestinian territories in other parts of the bill, but they're now considered to be funds spent by MEPI. MEPI has had its funding, go as high as 114 million in a year. The last 3 years, FY07, 8, and 9, the Congress granted 50 million, while the Bush administration's request varied from 75 million to 120 million. This year, the Obama administration has requested 86 million, which on one hand is not more than the Bush administration had been requesting in recent years. But it's important for a couple of reasons. One is that there was a fear that the Obama administration might get rid of MEPI entirely or drastically reduce its funding. The other is a point that's kind of consistent this year in that in some ways this budget request is more meaningful than the past couple of budget requests because President Obama clearly has the support of Congress in a way that President Bush did not have during the last couple of years with the Democratic control of Congress. It now appears that Congress will grant MEPI at least 70 million. The House version of the appropriations bill that was passed on the 9th of this month, the 9th of July, contains $70 million for MEPI, and the Senate version left the amount entirely up to the discretion of the administration. So we will see when the two versions are reconciled in September exactly what the level is, but it appears to be 70 or more, which of course would be a 40% increase over the level of funding that MEPI's had for the last 3 years, which is a very important development, and it shows kind of the recognition by the Obama administration coming in of the important work of this initiative, which had been somewhat politically controversial here in Washington. It shows kind of the importance of the work that it's doing now and clear support for that. So I think that's a very important development. One of the more interesting aspects of the budget request was this huge demonstration of support for MEPI. The same can be said of Millennium Challenge Corporation, MCC. On the next page, you can see again that consistently Congress has granted considerably less than requested for both MEPI and MCC. That appears to likely to change in both cases this year. And the Obama administration request for FY10 for the MCC is $1.425 billion, which is a 63% increase over current levels. Now, it's unclear whether Congress will grant this full request and this full 63% increase, but it's clear that there will at least be a considerable increase. In the House, in their version of the bill, they allocated $1.4 billion of the $1.425 billion, so nearly all of the request. The Senate allocated considerably less than that, $950 million as it stands now, which the Senate Appropriations Committee has approved. We're waiting to see the Senate aims to pass the bill as a whole before adjourning at the end of next week. But even the level of $950 million is an increase in MCC's funding, and it will be closer to the request than they've granted in several years. So I think for both MEPI and MCC, we've seen a clear show of support from the Obama administration for these two Bush-era initiatives, and I think we can expect to see the Congress grant at least very close to the House requested, particularly in MEPI and the MCC. There's an uncertainty as to how close, but in any case, it will certainly be a considerable increase.